spots. No problem.
I'll do it for your family, Gary, okay?
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
All right.
Okay, so this is a picture that I took in the first winter, and it shows this is after a pretty decent rainstorm. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but you can see the ponding, you know, poor infiltration in this is the very far south field at the site there. So and you can see that that's an issue. You know, when you have soil sitting or water sitting on top of the soil, it's not allowing oxygen in, and it's killing microbes and doing all kinds of things that we don't want to happen. We want the water, the soil. So why are these issues occurring? And this is based on my interpretation. There could be other factors, but a lot of it has to do with texture at this site. There's impermeable subsurface clay layers. Sand content is high, and we kind of expect that. We're right next to the river. This is alluvial deposited soil, and so this texture variability is high. That's kind of what we'd expect. That's fine. There's also been some significant grading at the site to make it flat and appropriate for farming, and it's been drained. The lower field has been drained, and so it would be a river bottom essentially, right? So low soil organic matter. The native, you know, the baseline soil organic matter when we did that first year sampling is relatively low. We kind of expect that for California in the West here, but it is a little higher than 5 points across the whole field. That was kind of interesting, I thought. And then sodicity, we didn't. So we measured EC, which is total dissolved salts, but not specifically sodicity in this study. But I did take a look at some reports that Gary shared with me that showed a little bit of elevated sodium, and that also explains some of this poor infiltration issues because of dispersion. The clays disperse, clogs pores, prevents infiltration from being what it should be. So you can see here, this is just another picture of when I was doing this initial soil sampling, and you can see this texture variability. This is really variable with depth. Also a variable across the fields. I know, Gary, we've talked about this a few times, how one field is sandier, another field's got a little bit different texture, and the lower fields kind of got a little bit more clay. So you can just see that with depth here. This is one auger, and it has sand and silt, you know, in high quantities, and then just below this, there's a clay layer. So this variability makes it difficult to measure soil carbon and other things because the bulk density changes so much, and also there's natural variability in the amount of carbon that's in the soil to begin with. So every time you go to sample, it's going to be a little bit different, and that makes it really hard to see changes over time. So this is just another kind of evidence of this texture and what it causes in the soil. These are redox features, redoxomorphic features. And this is this is in the 60 to 90 centimeter depth section. And what this means, as a soil scientist looking at this means that this layer is flooded for some of the year, and then it dries out. And so you have these redox features as a result of the water dynamic changing throughout the year. You have iron moving down into the soil and then oxidizing and creating these redox features. So you see this really common. It's really common in these types of soils where you have these buried clay horizons. And again, it's just evidence of this difficulty with infiltration and water movement, especially a little bit lower in the profile. So again, this is just a little bit more, another picture here, and this is right in the furrow. I don't remember what time of year this is, but you can see some cracking and some dispersion at the surface of the soil, and this is what we're trying to address. So the proposed practice at this site was winter cover cropping. Winter cover crop treatment was proposed to improve water infiltration and increase soil organic matter content. Additionally, kind of testing out different regimes of planting, terminating, and integrating that management with the cotton management, which are all challenges in their own ways, right? But I think that I know that Gary, I think we learned a lot, right, about this and how best to manage these cover crops in the future. So I think it was really valuable in that way. So this is just another, I dropped this in here. This is in the report too, which I think you all have now, but this is just talking about the different practices each year and some notes about what the kind of good and bad were from each of them. So first year, the cover crop seed was drilled in into preformed cotton beds, and the seed was a little too deep, so we had not the best emergence, and terminated by disking in green, so there was no herbicide used in that first year. 2018-19 winter, disc field flat, flew on cover crop seed, herbicide to terminate, and disked in cover crop and reshaped beds. So there's this extra step of having to reshape the beds that's important to note here. The cover crop emergence was really good in this year, but it was a little bit more expensive overall because of the added tillage and shaping.
Jeff, we would have made the beds ahead of time, but we didn't do it. And so one way or another, we're going to make beds.
Yeah. Whether
it be at the beginning and use them over or put them in after the fact. So we didn't feel it's more of an effort because of the cover crop in the ground to work it into a bed.
Got it.
But we still, either way, we're going to make a bed.
Is the disking flat a necessary practice too? I mean, I know you have to undercut the cotton, but do you have to disc it flat, or is that kind of an optional thing too?
So with our minimum till practice, we would just keep heaping up the same old beds, but on this ground, it just doesn't work. We get a plow pan, we just have to, we're not ripping, but like we just ripped the ground the last couple of days. We're going over all these fields, but we've had a cotton crop and a wheat crop.
Yeah.
And now we're doing the tillage on two different crops, and there's some hard spots out there, and we're like 24 to 26 inches is where this hard spot is that we wanted to make sure we broke up. But if we don't do that, the minimum till doesn't work too well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've one thing throughout the course of this project, I've learned a lot about cotton, a lot about cotton management, and again, integrating with different crops that's the challenge, right? And I think that's one of the main things that I appreciate learning in this project, and that I think that knowledge can be, hopefully transferred along, so others will get to learn from our challenges. So and then the last year, left the previous cotton beds, flew on the cover crop seed, herbicide to terminate, disc and reshape beds. This year there wasn't rain at the right time, and there wasn't that much rain at all, and so it was difficult to get the establishment of the cover crop. And so I think that the management was good. Potentially, depending on which type of cover crop you want to plant, a drill may be better, but I think that it kind of depends on also the rain, and we don't always know, what's going to happen with the rain. So anyways, just some notes there.
After 2020 cotton crop, which would be the crop after this last go round of cover crop, because of the lack of rainfall in the wintertime, we had a pretty poor crop. We had a good stand when we planted the cotton. We were excited about that, but at the end of the year, the crop was not that good. And so it started out looking like we'd done something, but I think we need to have some ground moisture in the wintertime, because when we start putting it on the top, it just doesn't go very deep.
Yeah.
But that rainfall, it works its way down better.
Yeah. So there were some other practices that were introduced kind of mid-project, compost application and gypsum amendment. These were introduced, we kind of talked about it, I remember, and think that compost application is in my opinion is always good. So if it can be afforded or justified, go for it. And the gypsum amendment was meant to address the acidity issue and help to cause some better aggregation and work with the water relations to improve those. So yeah, data and observation. So we're going to go through and just look at some of these things. I'll have to explain like this ANOVA table, but other things maybe more self-explanatory. So with the main greenhouse gas, we looked at nitrous oxide, methane, and carbon dioxide. The main greenhouse gas of interest is nitrous oxide. It's roughly 300 times more potent as a greenhouse gas warming and its warming effect as carbon dioxide. And when you're talking about agriculture, carbon dioxide is, plants fix carbon. So we're not as concerned about carbon dioxide because there's a net effect of pulling carbon out of the air of plants, right? But nitrous oxide is something that can be managed, and our management practices do affect how much nitrous oxide is released into the atmosphere as a result of agriculture. It's just kind of a thing that happens. We have agriculture, we add nitrogen to these systems, and there's going to be some kind of emission more than would be naturally because we're getting a crop and we're adding nutrients to the system, we're adding nitrogen. But how we can manage that is what's important. So when I basically used the greenhouse gas data to create a model, and the model I fed in not only the greenhouse gas flux data, but also data about season. The GWC is gravimetric water content, nitrate N concentration, and ammonium N concentration in the soil. So I basically use those different factors to help determine what was causing the flux or which things were related. And that's what this ANOVA table tells us about. So at the Pikalok site, we see the treatment. So the cover crop or no cover crop wasn't significantly different. Season wasn't significantly different, but gravimetric water content was. So as the water content of the soil changed, so did the nitrous oxide emissions. That's what this is essentially saying. And I would have thought that nitrate or ammonium may also have been things that affected N2O emissions because it's a nitrogen containing gas. But I think that the fertilization was never very high, and the levels of nitrate and ammonium were never very high, and so that wasn't a significant factor. So mainly it's just this water content, and that's actually not really surprising at all. When we look at flood irrigated systems compared to like subsurface irrigated systems, the subsurface irrigated systems have much less water near the surface, and nitrous oxide production is a anoxic process. Like water helps keep oxygen out or prevent it from diffusing in rather, and so you get these oxygen depleted zones, and that's where you have N2O production. So if you think of like a dairy with the lagoon, N2O emissions. Rice systems, you get methane and N2O production in those types of systems. So we get a little bit of N2O production, but the production wasn't very high overall, even at this site. But again, this is just telling us a little bit about which factors impact N2O emissions. At the West site, it was a little bit different. Still did not see a treatment effect in between the differences in between treatments, but season, gravimetric water content, and ammonium were all significant. So these are factors that affected nitrous oxide emissions.
So I'll just to comment on the nitrous oxide emissions. The conversion to any micro irrigation system, be it surface or subsurface, has dramatically reduced nitrous oxide emissions from California agriculture. As a matter of fact, a fully fertilized micro irrigation system produces less nitrous oxide than a flood irrigation system that's not fertilized. So that's just the concept. That's just where the industry went, and it has done a really good job. So we've almost essentially eliminated nitrous oxide emissions.
Yeah, from irrigated agriculture at least.
Yeah.
There's still some other sectors that produce it, but from irrigated agriculture, the production of the fertilizer still, results in some emissions, and animal agriculture still results in some emissions. And there's still trace emissions, but it's almost completely eliminated from micro irrigated, especially subsurface irrigated systems like tomatoes. So some notes on soil organic matter and active carbon. On the left here is the active carbon, or POC, permanganate oxidizable carbon. We didn't detect a change in soil organic carbon or POC from the cover cropping, so no treatment effect. And actually, the no cover crop treatment has higher active carbon than the cover crop system. So you can see that the error bars are real close to each other, though. So that tells you how variable this data is. Permanganate oxidizable carbon data is notoriously variable, and it's especially variable in our variable soils. So, in California, we have these alluvial soils that were, deposited texture changes is expected. Carbon concentration is highly variable, and it's legitimately tough to see these treatment effects, especially in the short course of a project. Especially considering we had difficulty with, establishing a cover crop over all 3 years. On the right-hand side, we see the soil organic carbon ANOVA table. So you can see it for the west side rec and Pikalok forming there. We didn't see a treatment effect. And again, this is a significant difference in between treatments. But we can see at your site here, the year was significant. So the years, there was a change in between different years, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But we also see a little bit of a depth effect. So higher concentration at the surface than below, which is to be expected. Blocks, which is, A, B, C, or 102, 103, or what I think 103, 104, 105 fields were not different significantly as with respect to soil carbon. So this is the change in soil organic carbon over time, over the 3-year course of the project. And this is encouraging. Again, high amount of variability, within treatments. And we didn't see a difference with respect to cover crop, no cover crop, but we did see soil organic carbon increase at this site over time. This is in metric tons per hectare, so I scaled it up to the field level, and we see a pretty significant increase in both treatments across all 3 fields. So a little bit of a change from 2018 to 2019, and then it increased a little bit more of a change from 2019 to 2020. So again, this is not really statistically or scientifically that useful, because this is not the factor that we were looking at. We were looking at our treatment, which was cover cropping, no cover cropping, but we did apply this compost, we did apply the gypsum, we did do some other things, and we did see a change. So that's encouraging. Yeah, so practices other than cover cropping can explain increase in soil organic matter.
So it was hard for you to measure because of the compost?
I mean, I think we probably would have just seen no difference if we would have not applied compost. But yeah, and again, I just want to repeat this again. We saw it at both sites, but even more variability at your site. So the textural variability And the way that we designed our plots and stuff like that made it tough to see stuff. We would have had to take a lot more samples and analyze a lot more samples, and have smaller plots, and in order to be able to potentially see something. It's tough. Soils are variable. I mean, that's the name of the game. I wish it were easier, but that's soil scientists, we struggle with this. It's just this normal thing that we struggle with, is trying to figure out how to, until you've done research at a site many times, you really don't know anything about what you need to soil, how much you need to sample it, or whether you even should, to try to see a treatment effect, because there's just variability is inherent in soils. So yeah. So aggregate stability. This is a picture from the west side rec on the right of the no-till cover crop site. So this is what we're shooting for as far as aggregate stability. Those soils are aggregated, and the surface condition is ripe for great infiltration and water movement. So I made this primarily about your site, Gary, but we look at some infiltration data. You see it in the report too. You look at the infiltration and aggregate stability data in the report at Westside. It's pretty amazing, the amount of aggregation. But so we didn't see that kind of effect at your site. It was, in fact, once I did the statistics and on the data, the scores were exactly the same. So in between both the cover crop and no cover crop sites. So the scores, 2.118 was the average score for both sites, and there was no significant difference between the two. But you can see at Westside, there's a significant difference in between treatments. The high score was the cover crop no-till, and that's average score of 5.8. So that's pretty high, And the low score was the no cover crop standard till, actually, and it was 3.167. So, and again, there's a little bit of a difference, pretty significant difference at each site in between the soil textures too. So at Westside, you have a little bit more clay, a little bit more of a finer textured soil, and that means that aggregation happens a little bit more readily. Whereas at your site, more sand, and a little tougher to get that aggregation to happen. So, yeah. Right. Infiltration. So again, this is knowing exactly when and how to, I struggled with this, knowing exactly how to collect this data even. And we ended up using data that Geoff collected at the end. But I think we probably would have seen a difference in infiltration if we would have done infiltration with the cover crop in the ground during the winter, as opposed to having no cover crop in the ground. We could have seen a difference there, but I don't know. I haven't seen data like that before published. I don't really know exactly. Yeah, but so we didn't observe a difference in between treatments. There was, like I said, there was likely an effect. I remember just observing the cover crop when it was in the field right after rain, and there wasn't that ponding that we saw earlier in that picture. It wasn't happening. The water was making it into the ground, and that is, I think, thanks to the cover crop being in the ground. The residual effect after the cover crop has been terminated and tilled in, I don't think is going to be really significant until you change the soil organic matter content of the soil, or unless you change some other chemical or physical factor. But when the cover crop's growing during the winter, it will help with infiltration. That's just a physical effect of having the plant and the root channels kind of like pores almost to have water infiltrate into the soil. So yeah.
Geoff,
go ahead.
Geoff, how was this graphic generated, and then which year is this generated from?
This is from 2020. So this is 2020 data. We only did infiltration one time at the Pikalok site, and it was generated by just giving each test got a score, amount of time that it took to infiltrate each inch of soil. It was a single ring infiltration test.
Okay, the small rings, yeah.
Small ring, 1 inch of water
Yep.
was applied to the ring, and then the time was measured for that water to infiltrate. And so,
Gotcha.
yeah, so less time is better, you know, but it was the main thing to realize is that the 2 lines are together. You know, there's no difference in between these
Yeah.
treatments.
Right.
Yeah.
And we really wouldn't expect it with the level of cover crop that we had this last year, right?
No, I don't. Well, I think that no, but again, I don't think we would see necessarily an effect. Maybe after a long time, like at Westside, you know, many years of cover cropping, we may see a residual effect. You see kind of an additive effect in that data, where the treatments are kind of stacked on top of each other. You add cover cropping, the infiltration is a little bit better. You know, you add cover cropping and no-till, even better. And so that's what I would expect that we'd see here, but probably only after a decade or more of management. After 3 years, only really 1 super good year of cover cropping, I wouldn't expect to see, you know, other than when the cover crop is physically in the ground, I wouldn't expect to see a difference. So that's just kind of the nature of how the time it takes soils to change, you know.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Right, economic analysis. So there's a lot of numbers here. Basically, I had a couple meetings with Gary and put some numbers in here about practice, the costs of practices, the yield change, and the price of the commodity, which is cotton in this case. And then the kind of return on investment is just the dollar yield change over the price of the practice per acre. And this is largely driven, I mean, some of it is cost on the left, but it's mostly driven by the price of the commodity. And that's the takeaway from this table, is that if you're not making enough on the cotton, you can't justify the practice costs. And so that's the big challenge that kept coming back, is that, okay, how do we get enough for the cotton crop so we can do these things that I think everyone wants to do, you know? And it was justified in the last year purely because cotton, I mean, there was a return on the investment, quote unquote, in the last year purely because cotton prices came up. And there wouldn't have been a return, or it would have been a negative return if cotton prices had stayed level. So because the costs did not go down. So this is the kind of the hard part, right? Is that we wish it were easier, but if it's less, if cotton prices are under $1, it's not really economical, or there's no way to pay. There's no way to pay for the practices. So partially also because we're not going to see an effect immediately, you know. So it's going to take a couple years before we may see a yield change, and we may not even see a yield change. These are just kind of like investments in the resistance and, you know, the stability of the system rather than in increased yield. Increased yield may occur, but it may not. That's what we've seen in other systems. So any questions here?
I think a question for us is, do you spend the money and just put on compost? Or do you spend the money and irrigate a cover crop? So you have it every year?
Yeah.
Because I could spend the money on seed and an application cost and not get rain, and I get nothing other than a bill. But if I put, so if
my take, and I think this is, I've not been shy about this, my take is that in a system where water and timing of irrigation are factors, it's compost. Compost is a better investment because it's a sure thing. You know what you're getting when you're applying compost. But I think cover cropping is great, especially if you're having issues with this infiltration issue and you want to get that winter rain in. But the way that the winters have been and how variable the winters have been, it's tough, you know. you may not even get the rain to need the cover crop to get the infiltration to happen. So it is really it's a balance. I don't know the right answer, and I think it's going to be different for each farmer. I think that if I had to recommend something as an economically the most sure thing, it would be the compost and gypsum, or gypsum, one of the other, because I think that you're going to get an aggregation effect to help with water movement throughout the year with the gypsum, and you're for sure going to get some carbon, because you're going to get and it's a little bit more stable, at least a little bit more humified than just crop residue with the compost. So, but if you can do all of it, do all of it. That's what I would say. If you can justify it.
Yeah, you got to have a crop that can afford it.
Yeah.
Unless you're just writing it off as an investment in the soil, which to a point we do.
Yeah.
We grew a wheat crop this year. I've got all kinds of organic matter out there to work in the ground.
Yeah.
And I irrigated that back in the fall to get it going. It turned out, that's probably the most productive rotation towards this effort I've had in a while. Mm-hmm. And I got good money for it. So that doesn't happen too often. But if you could, we don't double crop, but I could have with a wheat crop. Could have done wheat hay, but then you're hauling it all away. Mm-hmm. Taking the grain out, some straw, and we sure left a lot of straw and root mass there. So that was a good productive year for us on those fields.
Yeah, and I think that was awesome. Part of it was just luck with, call it luck with the way COVID changed the economics of growing different crops, but being able to get a good price for wheat and also get a rotation in, I think is pretty awesome. And like you said, it's been really difficult with water this year, so not having to water the cotton this summer, that cotton at least has, I'm sure, been a little bit of helped with labor at least, so I think the goal is to keep growing roots in the ground as much of the time as possible, but we do live in a dry place, and we do live in a place that is, we kind of got to be inventive sometimes. And I don't know maybe Will has an opinion about this, but I think rotating is a good thing for the soil, and rotating with a grain, if you can justify it, or rotating with alfalfa or something like that, is going to be good for your soil, and it's going to help your soil structure and help with your availability of micronutrients and all kinds of stuff. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, our results from the SAS project here at campus showed that under conventional practices, a crop rotation increases soil health, soil carbon. Not nearly as much as planting a cover crop, but it does. There are crops like wheat that do a better job at it. There are crops like corn that can actually degrade your soil. So it depends on the nature of the rotation.
It may be a naive thought here, but we have variability, but we also have these years like 2011, 2017, and other above average rainfall years. And sometimes there's a little bit of a crystal ball there where we do see multiple systems coming in the winter. And I know you can't order up seed, just with a snap of the finger. You can't order that plane drop, in that kind of timing. But are there maybe some opportunities here where we do have what appears to be a good rainfall year? We've got moist soils and can take advantage of those timings to sort of turn the button and say, maybe this is a good year for cover cropping, or at least the likelihood that that's going to be a successful activity appears to be there. Is that too naive, Gary, to be able to think about the timing of something like that?
Well, I think along with what you're saying, my backup plan might be and on these fields particular, we normally have a well that we can irrigate any time of the year. Where a lot of our fields, it's canal water, and I don't have mid-November to almost mid-February. And so your cover crop is all about rainfall if you were doing it there, but on these fields, you know, so you put your seed out there and come first of the year or even Thanksgiving, if you haven't got any rains, you irrigate it, turn the well on. Now, I don't have any employees around that time of year, so that's just me, but you know, it's certainly something you can do. Now, if I had a drip system, I don't know that I could get it going with the drip system. I kind of think furrow irrigating is how we're going to get a cover crop going. I don't see the water moving from down a foot down and coming up in the soil, but you got to mess with it. You know, maybe don't peak it up, put it down flat, closer to the drip tape, and then just depends what your following crop is going to be. So.
So hope for
is that the main part of your data presentation, Jeff?
Oh yeah, I'm almost done here.
Right. Well, let me just tag on to. It's pretty hard to argue against. I think the compelling analysis that you're showing here and the economics, Jeff, and I think we all probably can understand why you're encouraging maybe compost over cover crop. But Dan, your idea is something that, you know, are there creative ways for maybe somehow inserting cover crops? That leads to a question, Gary, that I've had in the back of my mind to ask you for a while now, and help us understand now. You're in the exchange contract area, and you just mentioned that you don't have water in that winter period over the whole ranch there, but you might have it in certain places there. Are you able to put on 2 or maybe even 4 inches of water because of your endowed historical water rights situation there? That's a factor. That could be a factor. The last thing I'll throw out here is following up on Dan's point. I didn't even think about sharing or you know, bringing this kind of an idea up with everyone this afternoon. But Gary, I could show you. There's a guy over in Hollister, and you brought up the idea of maybe having drip tape, and you don't know if you could get a cover crop germinated with drip tape. What this guy is doing, Gary, he's just over the hill in Hollister, and he doesn't have water either, but he is actually seeding cover crops in single rows that are spaced out 30, 40 inches apart, and in irrigating them with very minimal amounts of drip irrigation water there. And lo and behold, it's surprising, but the canopy of the cover crop spreads and grows until, you know, depending on what part of the year it is, of course, how that develops. But the guy gets a lot of growth out of very limited, strictly conserved amounts of water there. So Dan, your idea of creativity in the cover cropping arena might be something that, but Gary, correct me if I'm wrong when I'm thinking that you have better water rights than others in the valley. Is that
so that's true. I mean, on 65% of our ranch is in that water district.
Yeah.
And the balance is what they call class 2 ground. And on a year like this, there is no surface delivered water to class 2 ground. The rest of the, you know, I get canal water. And so I have wells, because there are years like this that we don't get canal water for, you know, over 400 acres. And so the wells are the only thing I have in the wintertime. my tree fields, my alfalfa currently, and where we are right now growing cotton is all class 1, or, I don't have canal water for those, but trees go dormant, things like that.
Yeah.
You work around it. But on these particular fields, the sand fields, we call them, we have a well and we can irrigate them year round. That's what's different about those fields than the other fields. But we just happen to have a lot of this out of district ground, we call it, because of where we're at. And when they drew the lines and picked the fields, and you're on this side of the creek and you're on that side of the wash, and that's the way it was back before we were here. And so it's the problem fields have groundwater to pump for well water. So we have something to do. It's just if you don't give that canal water, then you're pumping all year long.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
it can be a backup plan for midwinter. The sooner that seed gets watered, the more growth you're going to get out of it. Depends on what our following crop is going to be.
Yeah.
Well, and it depends also on the cover crop species choice, right? Because if you're doing almost a double cropping type thing with wheat and then cotton, could you do that? Do you think you could do that?
You could do like wheat hay, where you get in and chop it and bale it and get it out. You don't wait for it to dry down, and that's clear into June.
Yeah.
But if you could get it off, and there you might, if you had a no-till planting method into wheat stubble, you could double crop wheat hay with cotton.
Because then you could get the cover crop effect, but you could also justify the costs of planting and doing a little bit of irrigation to establish that wheat. So that would be kind of like not a pure cover crop, but also you're getting something, right? So
yeah,
if that were the goal, and you could do something different each year. You could do compost one year and then do that on a rotation or something like that. I think these kind of creative solutions are where it's at, so yeah,
you got, and right now every feed going to a dairy is a high price. And so there's good money on wheat hay this year.
Yeah.
But even if you just covered your cost, that's better than our cover crop did.
Yeah.
No,
that's what I mean. Like even if you didn't get a lot for the hay, but you got enough to pay for the costs, then it would kind of float it, and then you get the investment in the soil. So that's like a long-term return, rather than a short-term return.
Yeah, and you just might get stuck once every 10 years because it was a super wet year, and you don't, the wheat hay thing messes you up going into cotton, but so be it. It's not going to happen every year.
Yeah.
Gary, I didn't think about sharing this with you guys either, but just up the road, I don't know if you know this, but that's what Bowles is pretty much doing this. I mean, with Kerry Crum and everything, they didn't remove the wheat cover crop with harvesting it off for hay. They brought animals in there, but then they strip till cotton right into there. So there might be ideas there. If you want to see that field, we can show you what that looks like there. But it's been a learning process as well there. Jeff, go ahead and
I just have a couple more slides here. 2021 and beyond, after project completion, we've been talking about winter wheat crop was planted and grown through to harvest. This rotation ended up being well timed and economical. You got money not only for the wheat because the wheat prices were good, but also for the straw. Since you left the crop full all the way into harvest, you got quite a bit of residue. So even though you didn't have a winter cover crop, I mean, you had a cover, you got a lot of residue. So it's kind of like you get the best of both worlds, you know. So that may not happen every year, but it happened this year, which is great. Plans to continue with many project practices. Again, I don't really know exactly what you plan to do. I know you talked last time we talked, you want to go back to cotton potentially next year. But I think hopefully that we've planted the seed, so to speak, on cover cropping and compost addition and some of these practices. So yeah, and then another thing that's come up over the last couple of years is the potential change to micro irrigation or subsurface drip or something like that, and potential change in cash crop as well, depending on how things go with those markets, cotton or something else. Either keeping it in cotton or switching to almonds or tomatoes or another annual crop. So additionally, micro irrigation would almost eliminate challenges with water movement and improve yields. I think that a lot of the challenges in this field have to do with getting water to the crop roots and getting it to infiltrate in the right places, and also moving some of those salts away from the crop roots, especially sodium. And my subsurface drip would do that. But again, it's a huge cost, and you'd have to justify it. So not sure exactly what we'll end up doing, but I'm anxious to see what you decide to do, and keep following what you do with these fields. Yeah, and then finally, just a huge thank you to you and Mari for your generosity and for allowing me to undertake this project over the past 3 years. I gained a lot of experience that not every graduate student gets, to get this kind of field experience. And it's definitely made me a better scientist. And I also got a dog. I don't know if everyone else here knows, but Mac, my dog, was abandoned on the edge of their property, and I was first just going to bring him to a rescue, but I ended up keeping him. So he's one of the dogs I just yelled at a minute ago. Quit making noise. So yeah, thank you again, and I really appreciate it. So that's it.
Well, listen, very nice, Jeff. Very nice job there. I think you gave us a good indication of the overall variability of the processes and the issues that we all have been up against, and I think you summarized that very nicely. And I think just hats off to Jeff here also, because I think we all have seen tremendous development and growth over these last 3 years, and you've really done a nice job in taking charge and handle of the data and working through this project with Gary and the Martins there. So we really want to acknowledge that as well. Gary, it has been a real joy, I think, for all of us to get to know you these last years and know you better there. You're a stand-up guy for sure there, and we all respect and admire you greatly there, and we just want to thank you for everything. And Jeff did the overwhelming bulk of the report writing that went into CDFA there, but I hope you have an impression now that we tried to make good on our bargain with you right from the beginning there, and trying to provide some information there. So with that, I just open discussion, or any questions that anybody has that haven't been asked yet, or that anybody wants to bring up, we can certainly do that. But we thank you, Gary, and pass that on to your family, okay?
I certainly will. Both of you guys, thanks we've learned a lot. Jeffrey, some good observations, good practical approach to a lot of things we were seeing was helpful to us. And I think there's more to be done here, and I got more questions, and we'll see how we apply things to it. But
yeah.
It's been a good 3 years for us. I think we just like improving things if we can, and even if we can't, I mean, we're just trying to farm whatever the river washed over the bank to us. And unfortunately, it may not be the best stuff in the world, but that's what's right here. So we'll do our best, but thanks again.
Anybody else? William or Dan?
No, I want to thank Gary. Thanks, Gary, because it's hard to find great cooperators, and you've been great. So thanks very much.
And Jeff, your stick-to-itiveness through the process, I've been impressed. You've done a real good job of getting out there and just taking care of things. So appreciate that. Gary, you've always been a fantastic UC cooperator with us. We've done how many variety trials over the years and other things. And thank you as well. Really good project. I think we did learn quite a bit, and I'm just happy that we were able to pull something together. And yeah, nice work. It's tough work, right? It wasn't a clear-cut project. I mean, we had some objectives, but and we met some of those and others. It's what the weather gives us is part of the answer to that. But nice work.
It was nice the last 2 years to be able to get outside and do something too. So,
all right. Well, listen, Jeff, we thank you very much for the concise and very good summary there. And thanks everyone for taking some time this afternoon. With that, I don't know, we will adjourn here if that's all right, but I think with your encouragement, Jeff, we're going to stay in touch with each other there, all of us. And if we have questions or things that come up down the road, just let us know what's happening and we'll talk with each other there. If that's all right, I'll save the recording and I'll give it to you, Gary, to pass on to your family. Okay.
thank you. Appreciate that, Jeff.
All right. Okay.
All right.
You guys
Thanks
care.
a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.